All right. Good morning to all of you. I hope you enjoyed the party and the concert last night. It wouldn't have been the same if ethyl alcohol was a controlled substance in this country. Luckily for us, or luckily for me, it isn't. But I'm not going to talk about substances that are not controlled. In contrary, I'm going to talk about controlled substances today. And so first of all, I would like to start with the definition. What are controlled substances? And then, what does ChemAxon do with controlled substances? What do we have to do with controlled substances? I give you a hint, we have a solution. And then I would like to give some insight how legal documents are transformed into definitions, as we call them. And finally, of course, the application study itself, what we found and what we learned from doing this study. So if you start looking on the internet, perhaps, what's the definition of the term controlled substance, then you will very quickly realize that there is no concise definition, there is no elaborate definition of the term. You can only find definitions in legal documents, like this one, this example here, which is from the United States Code Controlled Substance Act. And it defines controlled substances as drugs or other substances or immediate precursors included in Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of United States Code. Well, that is not a helpful definition. It doesn't tell us anything about the structures themselves or their chemistry. Are they related in any way? Let's see another definition. This is slightly better, and this is from Wikipedia, by the way. A controlled substance is generally a drug or chemical whose manufacture, possession, transport, or use is regulated by a government. Aha, so a government is involved. Well, we still don't know anything about the chemistry of these structures, but at least now we know that anything that is controlled is somehow related to a country's government. So the governments decide what they control and how they control it. And we will see the impact of this later. So what is compliance checker? When we mention compliance checker, we can think of a couple of things. First of all, we can think of a nice web UI, a web user interface, where you can put in your compounds of interest and then generate reports on those compounds, whether they are controlled in a particular country. But you can also think of what's beyond the surface, the knowledge base that actually makes it possible to generate these reports. So what you can do with compliance checker, you can submit your single molecules or even a larger set of molecules and get back these reports, whether any of those compounds are controlled in a chosen country. And as I said, behind the curtains there is this knowledge base which was transformed, which was built up from all the legislation of the countries to make it searchable, to make the legal terms, the legal definitions searchable. And this knowledge base is continuously updated, so you can always see the latest legislation so that you never miss out on anything. This is an important aspect. And it is also possible to create user-defined categories, which basically means that if your company has a license in a particular country for a particular controlled substance, then you can create an exemption from this knowledge base, within this knowledge base, so that those compounds your company has license for will not show up as a controlled substance anymore in your report. And compliance checker comes with several integration points to be easy to integrate or fit into any more complex search or discovery workflow. Currently, compliance checker comes with legislative information for these 18 countries, and also controlled substance acts or legislative documents from 5 major international conventions. So how does the definition look like in compliance checker? How do we put all the legal information together to make it searchable and make it understandable? So definitions can vary very much in their structure, in their complexity. Like this one here, this is an explicit mention of a molecule in the Controlled Substance Act Schedule 2 of the United States Code. And this is codeine. This is specifically mentioned in this legal document so that we know that in the United States this compound is controlled. But if we keep looking in the same set of legal documents for the same country, then we will find that there is Schedule 3, which also mentions codeine. But then it mentions within a broader legal context. And the good thing about Compliance Checker is that it doesn't just show you that or report you that this particular compound is mentioned in this legal document and therefore it is controlled. But it also tells you what's the legal context. So what are the circumstances of control? Like in this case, in Schedule 3, which defines the actual circumstances. This was an easy one. This was a relatively defined legal term for substance control, but we have more complex definitions as well. Like this one here, this is from the 3rd Generation Synthetic Cannabinoids Act from the United Kingdom. And this is a real beast. So if you look at the actual definition, then it's overwhelming. And with definitions like this, it becomes practically impossible to determine whether a compound is controlled just manually by just looking at the definition or by just reading the legal terms. So we created this massive marker structure to describe what's inside this 3rd Generation Synthetic Cannabinoids Act. And the problem with this is that this definition is actually extends to an infinite chemical space. Because if you take a closer look, if we zoom in, then you can see, maybe you cannot see from the back, but these groups here, these are homology groups, carboalicyclyl. So now you see the problem that to be able to determine whether a compound is controlled, you have to know all these details. And these were just 2 examples of definitions. So now the application study that we conducted, what was it about? We took compounds in Campbell from March 2017, so that's Campbell 23 if you are familiar with the versions. If you're not familiar with Campbell, Campbell is containing structures of pharmaceutical importance, structures extracted from medicinal chemistry literature and from patents and from other sources as well. And that version of Campbell contained 1.7 million structures, of which we had to drop a few 10,000 because they were not explicit or not well-defined structures. So we ended up with 1.69 million compounds. And we took this entire set and run on an average compliance checker server with the following details. 8 logical cores and 32 gigabytes of RAM. And we ended up having 3.5 hours response time or run time on average. So just at a glimpse, what we found is that among those 1.69 million compounds, some 64,000 compounds appear to be controlled, so about 4% of the entire Campbell set is controlled, at least in one country for which we have the legislation. Then we checked which are those compounds that are controlled in every country and by all European Union and United Nations regulations. And we found that only 11 compounds from the Campbell set are controlled by the entire knowledge base or by all countries, of which 9 are actually the different sterilized American salt forms of norepinephrine, which is a decongestant and it has a high risk of abuse. And there were 2 other compounds, psychedelic drugs, which appeared also to be controlled by all countries, lysergic acid, dimethylamine, so LSD, and DOM, dimethoxy methamphetamine. And it's also interesting to note that for these two, only the isotopically labeled forms are present in the Campbell set. So then we moved forward and started to look at the numbers grouped by countries. So how many compounds a particular country controls. And we found something surprising, at least it was surprising to me, because I expected to see that at least those countries which share some similar cultural background or are within the same economical area, they will most likely control the same or similar set of compounds. Well, we found the contrary, because if you look at countries in the EU, then you can see that they are radically different in terms of number of substances controlled. So the United Kingdom and Belgium, they rule this picture. They control much higher number of substances than other countries in the EU. And it's also apparent on this figure by these orange columns how many compounds are specifically controlled in that country. So those compounds counted in the orange columns are not controlled in any other country. Okay. And just one more addition to this picture is you probably don't see that tiny speck, orange speck here for the Netherlands, which depicts a single compound, which is this compound here, lysergic acid analog. So let's investigate this compound further. Why is it controlled? And it turns out that lysergic acid, obviously, as we said already, the LSD, is controlled in all 18 countries and by all conventions that we investigated. This one meth surgid, which is the lysergic acid analog, is only controlled by the Netherlands. So again, another proof how important it is, what's the legal context. And just because one compound is controlled by everyone, doesn't mean that more or less random analog of it will not be controlled in another. So you always have to look at the country of your choice, maybe the country you operate in when you check for controlled substance legislation. Now, what we checked next was, so we tried to put all this information on a timeline. We have different versions of the knowledge base available, so you can actually do this yourself if you want. You can kind of move back in time if you want to check the legal environment for a particular time in the past. So we did that, and we found that from 2016, both the number of regulatory documents as well as the number of controlled substances increase significantly. Why is this important? This is important because if we put this into some context, then it may happen that just a single document by a single country can drastically change the global picture of controlled substances. This is actually what happened by the UK government introducing the third generation Synthetic Cannabinoids Act, and it's just exploded the number of controlled substances in the Campbell set. Yet another figure to look at the data from a different perspective, and this is now looking at number of compounds, number of controlled compounds versus the number of countries controlling that particular compound. And we might see a trend here. I think this is just a coincidence to have this nice curve. But what I'd like to drive your attention to is actually we can group these the different sides of the figure, and we can say that those compounds which are only controlled by 1/3 of the countries can be called country-specific controlled substances. And then we have the other extreme, so those compounds which are controlled by 2/3 of the countries can be called globally controlled compounds. And what's even more interesting is the distribution. 98% of all the controlled substances are regulated only by specific countries, and only 1% is regulated globally. So if you remember what I said in the beginning, it's about the government to decide, or governments to decide what they want to control, and nobody has anything to say about it. You just have to comply, of course. So at the end of the presentation, I'd like to give you an idea how you can use this data. So what if we wanted to establish a catalog company, maybe, or a compound import-export company inside Europe? Which countries should we pick as the base of operation? Well, we should probably pick a country from the right-hand side of this chart, so maybe Spain. And if we pick Spain, then we have several nice options to travel by plane from Spain. And so then the next question is, which destination do you want to choose? Which destination country, which international client you want to choose? Obviously, the distance matters. Are there any other factors which we might want to consider? Well, we might want to consider the amount of paperwork required to transport controlled substances or potentially controlled substances to that country. So the country we probably don't want to choose is, for the moment, the United Kingdom. Like Brexit alone wouldn't be enough for them. And so maybe the Netherlands or Austria, or if distance is not a concern, then India. And I have to admit that these flights that you see there are passenger flights, not cargo flights. So probably on those particular flights, you cannot export anything, at least legally. Some people might still try, but they don't usually care about paperwork. Thank you for your attention.